Chapter 1: Static and Sorrow. They call our home the Raft. Not a raft, the raft. As if it's the only thing left floating in this poisoned gray expanse that swallowed the world. Maybe it is. My name, or the name I answer to, is Patchwork. It fits. My shack, perched precariously on a rusting pontoon fused to the skeletal hull of a half-submerged freighter, is a patchwork of salvaged corrugated iron, weeping plastic sheeting, and tarred canvas. My clothes are patchwork, stitched from scraps nobody else wanted. Even my thoughts these days feel like patchwork, frayed memories sewn onto anxieties, held together by the thin thread of routine. And my work? Well, my work is patchwork, coaxing life into dead circuits, weaving connections from discarded wires, trying to pull whispers from the static that blankets this ocean of trash. The raft isn't one thing. It's a million things jammed together by time, tide, and desperation. Barges lashed to pontoons, hulls welded onto other hulls, islands of compressed plastic bottles forming treacherous walkways, forests of rebar snagging the unwary. It groans and shifts constantly, a sleeping beast made of humanity's discarded dreams. The air is thick with the smell of brine, decay, melting plastic, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely organic, the unique perfume of the great Pacific garbage patch we drift in. Rain here isn't water. It's a greasy chemical drizzle that leaves iridescent slicks on every surface and makes your skin itch, sometimes peel. Survival is the only currency, and trust is rarer than clean water. My little corner of this purgatory is dedicated to the ghosts in the machine. Radios mostly. Shortwave, longwave, salvaged ship communicators, even cobbled together monstrosities built from scavenged circuit boards and hope. My obsession started small, a desire to hear a voice that wasn't tinged with the raft's despair, a connection to the before times or proof someone, anyone, else was still out there. Now it's a compulsion. Every cycle, as the weak, filtered sunlight struggles through the perpetual gray haze, I'm there. Headphones clamped over my ears, fingers teasing cracked dials, coaxing reluctant electrons through corroded pathways. Most days it's just the symphony of the void, the crackle and hiss of atmospheric noise, the rhythmic slosh of waves against plastic shores, the distant clang of someone hammering scrap, the groaning protest of the raft itself. Sometimes a fragment cuts through, a burst of encoded data from a weather satellite long past its use-by date, the ghostly echo of a maritime distress call years old, or faint, garbled voices speaking languages I don't understand, likely just stray signals bouncing off the ionosphere from halfway around a dead world. Hope flickers, then dies in the static. Today started like any other. The drizzle was heavier, drumming a dull rhythm on my tin roof. I'd fortified my morning ration of processed algae paste with a few drops of Myrmedic's Vitality tincture, tasted like rust and regret, but it kept the shakes at bay. Settling into my worn chair, surrounded by teetering stacks of salvaged electronics, I powered up the main rig. It's my pride and joy, centered around a salvaged naval transceiver unit I'd spent months coaxing back to life. I put on the heavy headphones, the cracked faux leather cool against my skin, and started the slow sweep. Low frequencies first. The usual deep hums and groans, the heartbeat of the ocean's toxic currents. Higher up, the crackle intensified. Snippets of automated weather reports, impossibly old, reading temperatures for cities long submerged. I nudged the main tuning dial, the needle crawling across the backlit display. Static, static. A sudden squeal of feedback I quickly adjusted for more static. Then something else. It wasn't a burst. It wasn't a fading echo. It was present. A voice riding a strangely stable carrier wave cutting through the background noise with unnerving clarity yet distorted as if strained through water or immense distance. Male, female, hard to tell. The pitch wavered, stretched, compressed, but it was speech. Actual, coherent speech. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was different. This felt close. Anyone hear this? Repeating transmission, authorization. Gone, code, meaningless now. Is anyone left? The voice was ragged, breathless, laced with a static that sounded less like interference and more like tearing fabric or breaking glass. I scrambled for the recording unit, my fingers fumbling with the worn buttons. A reel-to-reel salvaged from a pre-collapse enthusiast's yacht, clumsy but reliable. The tape spooled, magnetic heads engaging with a soft click. I fine-tuned the receiver, trying to filter out the bizarre distortion clinging to the signal. The center cannot hold. Scrap Shepherd's cordon, breached, oh gods, the sounds. A wet, choking noise interrupted the speaker. It's flowing, the metal, the plastic. It's not solid anymore. Section Gamma, gone, just pulled under. Scrap Shepherd's cordon. That tough old survivalist ran the tightest sector on the Raft, the West Flotilla, built on the reinforced decks of container ships. Breached, flowing, pulled under. It made no sense. I'd seen Scrap Shepherd's territory just yesterday, fortified, vigilant, solid as anything ever was on the Raft. The voice returned, higher-pitched, frantic. Hull Prophet was right. Wrong. Doesn't matter, the amalgam. It feels, it hungers. It's not just taking the structures, it's taking us, remaking. Another burst of that tearing static, followed by a sound like bubbling sludge. Hull Prophet, the wild-eyed fanatic who preached about the Patch's divine consciousness down in the sump, the lowest, most toxic levels of the Raft. His followers chanted about purification and rebirth in the effluent. I'd always dismissed him as a lunatic capitalizing on despair. But the amalgam. The word sent a chill down my spine I couldn't explain. It felt viscerally wrong. I can see it from here, the light. Oh gods, the light is wrong. It pulses from inside the mass. Reaching, towers are bending, like weeds, the Forge Hands workshop. Melting. Panic tightened my own throat. The Forge Hands place was a landmark, built into the massive gear housing of a defunct cargo crane, spitting smoke and sparks day and night. Melting, bending like weeds, impossible. It's not just the trash, it's learning, integrating the whispers. They aren't echoes anymore, they're its thoughts, planning. The voice broke, dissolving into desperate sobs. Patchwork, your shack, the antenna, it sees it as a nerve, a connection, wants to listen. My name, my name. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy despite the humid air. The voice knew my name, knew my setup, spoke of things happening now that weren't happening, spoke of things that couldn't happen, melting metal, flowing structures, the Patch thinking. Then the most chilling part. The voice through the static and the terror sounded familiar, terribly, achingly familiar, like an echo of my own voice, twisted by unimaginable stress and a temporal abyss. In no time it's coming up, through the floor, the walls, liquid plastic, metal teeth. Remember the day, the signal, warn them, warn the... The transmission ended, not faded, not lost in static. It cut off, sharp, absolute, like a switch thrown, leaving only the familiar, empty hiss of the void in my headphones. A silence. The shack felt suddenly colder, smaller. The drumming rain on the roof was no longer a dull rhythm, but the tapping fingers of something waiting outside. The gentle rocking of the raft wasn't the rhythm of the waves, but the stirring of a monstrous entity beneath. I sat frozen, hands hovering over the controls. My own name, my shack. A warning from a voice that sounded like mine, describing the impossible destruction of our entire world, broadcast with impossible clarity. It wasn't an old distress call. It wasn't a signal from across the globe. The horrifying conviction settled in my gut, heavy and cold as lead ballast. It was a signal from the future, our future. A final, desperate broadcast from the end of the raft. Slowly, numbly, I rewound the tape, pressed play. The distorted, terrified voice filled my ears again, speaking its impossible prophecy. The amalgam, it feels, it hungers. Outside, beyond my thin walls, a piece of debris scraped against the hull with a sound like fingernails on rusted steel, or perhaps like teeth. The raft groaned, a low, guttural sound that seemed to rise from the endless, shifting depths below. I was Patchwork, the listener, and I had just heard the sound of the world ending. Our world, and it was already beginning. Chapter 2: Ripples of Disbelief. The tape spooled back to the beginning, the silence in my shack pressing in like cotton wool. I played the recording again and again. Each time the distorted voice, my voice, surely it had to be, scraped against my nerves, etching its terror deeper into my mind. The amalgam, it feels, it hungers. Warn them. The words looped, a feedback cycle of future horror and present paralysis. Was I losing my mind? Was this some elaborate, cruel hoax broadcast by scavengers with too much time and salvaged tech? Or worse, was it the first sign of the infamous patch rot, the slow slide into delusion whispered about among those exposed too long to the toxic fumes and isolation? I gripped the edge of my workbench, knuckles white, trying to ground myself in the flimsy reality of my surroundings. The scent of ozone from the overworked transceiver, the damp chill seeping through the cracks, the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape of debris against the hull. Real, tangible. But the voice on the tape felt equally real. The raw panic, the specific details, Scrap Shepherd's cordon, the Forge Hands workshop, Hull Prophet, the amalgam. My own name, my shack described as a nerve. It was too precise, too detailed for a random hallucination. And the carrier wave. Solid, persistent, unlike any atmospheric ghost I'd ever chased. No, this was something else. Something dreadfully, impossibly real. A future scream echoing back through time. My first instinct was to broadcast it. Send the recording out on every frequency I could muster, a blanket warning to every soul clinging to this garbage island. But the voice, my voice, had warned against that, hadn't it? It sees it as a nerve, a connection, wants to listen. Broadcasting might just be ringing the dinner bell for this amalgam. It might accelerate the very doom the message described. No, I had to tell someone directly. Someone with influence, someone with the means to act, someone who might, just might, listen. The choices were grimly limited. There was Barge Boss and his thugs over in the East Tangle, but they'd likely just break my equipment and maybe my legs for disturbing their scrap-scrounging empire. There was the Meyer medic, wise in the ways of the Patch's physical corruptions, but lacking any real authority. Then there was Hull Prophet. The thought made my skin crawl. His followers, the rusted faithful, already believed the Patch was alive, a sleeping god waiting to awaken. Giving him this, it would be like handing a lit torch to a child in a fireworks factory. He'd twist it into validation, incite his cultists into frenzy, possibly even welcome the amalgam as their promised ascension. The transmission mentioned him, his being right yet wrong, a dangerous paradox. No, Hull Prophet was not an option. That left Scrap Shepherd, leader of the West Flotilla, master of the cordon, the most fortified, most organized sector of the Raft. Scrap Shepherd was everything I wasn't. Practical, grounded, commanding, suspicious of anything that couldn't be weighed, measured, or shot. They dealt in salvaged munitions, reinforced bulkheads, and hard realities. Telling Scrap Shepherd about a ghost voice, predicting the impossible melting of their stronghold felt like trying to explain quantum physics to a hammerhead shark. Yet, if anyone could organize a defense, if anyone would fight whatever was coming, it was them. The transmission said the cordon would be breached, but maybe knowing in advance could change that. Decision made. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Getting to the West Flotilla wasn't a casual stroll. It meant traversing the shifting, treacherous pathways of the Raft, crossing territories controlled by suspicious crews, navigating narrow bridges of dubious stability over dark, chemical-laced water. Taking the recording felt essential, proof, however flimsy. I ejected the reel, tucked it securely into an oilskin pouch, and grabbed my pry bar, less a weapon, more a tool for navigating jammed walkways and discouraging overly curious netrats. Stepping outside my shack was like stepping into a different world. The heavy drizzle had momentarily eased, leaving the air thick with a humid chemical tang. The perpetual gray sky pressed down, reflecting dully off surfaces slick with grime. A silence had fallen over this section of the Raft, deeper than usual. The rhythmic clang of hammering was absent. Even the ever-present scavenger gulls seemed muted, perched silently on rusting protrusions, watching with unsettling stillness. I started navigating the familiar route towards the West Flotilla, my boots splashing through puddles that shimmered with unnatural colors. The walkway here was a series of lashed-together pallets and salvaged ship doors, tilting precariously with each step. Below, the water was dark and oily, littered with floating plastic debris. Usually, you'd see schools of tiny, mutated fish darting beneath the surface, or the occasional glowgut hunting in the deeper channels. Today, the water seemed unnervingly still, almost viscous. As I rounded a hulking mass of compressed plastic bales that served as a windbreak, I saw movement ahead. Figures shuffling in the gloom near the entrance to the sump, the lower, more dangerous levels. They wore rags adorned with rusted metal scraps, the rusted faithful, Hull Prophet's followers. One of them, gaunt and wild-eyed, detached from the group and shambled towards me. Their skin had a strange, unhealthy sheen, dotted with what looked like weeping sores crusted with orange-brown flakes. "Listener," the faithful hissed, their voice rough as corroded steel. "You wander far from your nest of whispers. Does the static speak truths today?" I froze, my hand tightening on the pry bar. Just heading for the West Flotilla, trade. A weak lie, but safer than the truth. The faithful's eyes, disturbingly bright in their sunken sockets, seemed to bore into me. "The patch stirs," they rasped, leaning closer. I could smell the foulness of their breath mingled with the scent of decay. "The prophet feels it. The great rust awakens. Soon all will be purified, dissolved, remade in its image." They gestured towards the sump with a trembling hand. "He preaches now, tells of the signs. The water stills, the metal groans with new life. Soon." My blood ran cold. The water stills. The metal groans. Were these the early signs? Or was the prophet simply interpreting mundane events through the lens of his delusion? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty was terrifying. "I have business," I said curtly, trying to edge past. The faithful laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "All business is its business now, listener. Go, run to your walls of scrap. They will not hold back the tide of glorious decay." They turned and shuffled back towards the sump entrance, leaving me shaken. His words, meant as fanaticism, echoed the transmission's warning with chilling accuracy. Pressing on, I forced myself to focus. The journey took me across the spine, a narrow, elevated walkway made from the rusted frame of a collapsed bridge, offering a panoramic view of the raft's chaotic sprawl. From here, the sheer scale of our precarious existence was overwhelming. A floating junkyard metropolis stretching as far as the eye could see, shrouded in mist, groaning under its own weight. But today, something felt different. Looking down, I noticed patches of the water weren't just still, they seemed thicker, almost gelatinous in places, trapping debris in unnatural patterns. And clinging to the underside of some walkways, I saw strange, fibrous growths like pale, sickly weeds woven from plastic filaments, pulsing faintly. Had they always been there, unnoticed? Or were they new? The entrance to the West Flotilla was imposing. A massive bulkhead salvaged from a supertanker formed the main gate, flanked by watchtowers constructed from stacked shipping containers. Guards armed with harpoon guns and salvaged rifles patrolled the perimeter, the cordon. It radiated a sense of order and grim determination utterly alien to the rest of the raft. Solid, secure, impenetrable. The transmission's claim of its breach seemed utterly ludicrous looking at it now. Two guards, faces grim beneath makeshift helmets, blocked my path. "State your business, Patchwork." One of them, identifiable by the crude netting woven into their gear, knew me by sight if not by name. "Need to speak with Scrap Shepherd, urgent." The guard grunted. "Shepherd's busy, inventory check, come back next cycle." "It can't wait," I insisted, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "It's a security matter, a warning." They exchanged skeptical glances. Warning? About what? Barge boss sending his goons sniffing around again. "No, worse, something bigger." I tapped the oilskin pouch at my belt. "I have proof, a recording." The guards hesitated. My reputation as the Raft's eccentric radio obsessive preceded me, but the urgency in my tone, perhaps the genuine fear in my eyes, made them pause. One spat a stream of brown sludge over the railing. "All right, wait here. Don't touch anything." He disappeared through a heavy steel door set into the bulkhead. The weight stretched, each second thick with anxiety. I scanned the cordon's structure. Reinforced steel, vigilant guards, clear lines of sight. It looked invulnerable. Melting, flowing, pulled under, impossible, yet the voice on the tape. The door opened again. "Shepard will see you. 5 minutes, don't waste time." I followed the guard through a labyrinth of narrow corridors built within the container ships, the air cleaner here, the metallic tang less overpowering. We emerged onto what must have been the command deck of one of the original vessels, now converted into a Spartan operations center. Maps covered one wall, marked with patrol routes and resource caches. A long table dominated the center, littered with salvaged weapons components and communication gear far more robust than my own setup. And there, standing by a reinforced viewport overlooking the gray expanse, was Scrap Shepard. I couldn't tell their gender. They were encased in layers of protective gear, padded canvas, and strategically placed sheets of metal plating. A heavy mask obscured their face, fitted with filtered breathing tubes. Only their eyes were visible behind thick goggles, sharp, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth. They turned as I entered, their posture radiating authority and impatience. "Patchwork," the voice was filtered, metallic, but undeniably commanding. "My guard says you have an urgent warning, and proof." The skepticism was palpable. This had better not be about stray radio signals or ghost ship stories. We have actual threats to manage. My throat felt dry. It's a transmission like nothing I've ever heard before. Clear carrier wave, stable." Scrap Shepard tilted their heads slightly. "From where?" "Mainland, another flotilla." "No," I swallowed hard. From here, from the future." The air in the command center seemed to drop several degrees. The guards shifted uneasily. Scrap Shepard remained motionless for a long moment, their goggled eyes fixed on me. Then, a short, sharp bark of filtered laughter. "The future. Patchwork's finally claimed you, listener." "No, listen, please." I fumbled with the oilskin pouch, pulling out the reel-to-reel recorder. "I recorded it. It describes the end of the raft. It mentions you, your cordon being breached. It talks about the Forge Hands workshop melting. It names something called the Amalgam, a sentient part of the patch that consumes everything." I relayed the key points, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to control it. It even knew my name, my shack. Scrap Shepard listened, arms crossed, radiating disbelief. When I finished, they were silent again, observing me. "Let me understand," they said finally, their voice dangerously low. "You picked up a voice claiming to be from the future, predicting impossible events based on a fairy tale about the patch waking up, and you expect me to divert resources, panic the sectors based on this noise." "It sounded like me," I whispered. The voice, terrified, dying. "Stress can play tricks on the mind. Fumes, bad water, isolation." Scrap Shepard waved a dismissive, gauntleted hand. "We deal with reality here. Corrosion, raiders, structural failure, mutated eels chewing through flotation tanks. Those are real problems." But the water is stiller, I blurted out. There are strange growths appearing. The faithful are talking about the patch awakening. The faithful are lunatics looking for patterns in sewage, Scrap Shepherd snapped, taking a step closer. The water currents shift. We get different blooms of algae and fungus seasonally. It means nothing. Show me melting steel. Show me a breach in my cordon. Show me this amalgam. Until then you have nothing but static and fear. They pointed towards the door. Get out, and keep this madness to yourself. Panic is more dangerous than any ghost on the radio. Defeated, I hesitated. Will you at least listen to the recording? Scrap Shepherd considered it for a fraction of a second, then shook their head. No, I won't fill my head with nightmares. We have enough real ones. Now go. The guards escorted me back to the main gate, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. Stepping back out into the main raft felt like plunging back into a waking dream. The gray light seemed dimmer, the silence more profound. Scrap Shepherd's dismissal echoed in my ears, reinforcing my isolation. No one would believe me, not until it was too late. The journey back to my shack was a blur of anxiety. I saw the strange, fibrous growths again, maybe more of them now. A large netrat scurried past, and its fur seemed to have an unnatural, plastic-like sheen. Was I imagining it, projecting the transmission's horror onto the mundane decay of the raft? As I reached my shack, perched on its pontoon, my heart stopped. The scraping sound I'd heard earlier, the one I'd dismissed. It wasn't random debris. Clinging to the rusted metal hull just below the water line was a pulsating mass of something resembling fused plastic and metal shards, interwoven with those same pale, fibrous tendrils I'd seen elsewhere. It clung there like some obscene barnacle, and as I watched, rooted to the spot in horror, a strand of it seemed to slowly, deliberately retract into the murky water. The amalgam wasn't just coming, it was already here, and it was listening. Chapter 3: The Whispering Spread. My breath hitched in my throat. The pulsating mass clinging to my pontoon wasn't large, maybe the size of my two fists clenched together, but its presence felt immense, malevolent. Fused plastic, rusted metal shards woven through with those sickly pale tendrils. It looked like a tumor growing on the raft's decaying body, and it was right here beneath my feet listening. The final words of the transmission slammed back into my mind. Your shack. The antenna. It sees it as a nerve, a connection. Wants to listen. Panic warred with a desperate need to do something. Ignoring it felt impossible. Letting it stay felt like inviting the executioner into my home. My prybar felt woefully inadequate. What if touching it was dangerous? What if it could absorb metal or me? Hesitantly, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I knelt at the edge of the pontoon. The mass pulsed faintly, a slow, deliberate rhythm like a sleeping heart. The tendrils writhed slightly in the murky water. It seemed aware, watching me. Taking a deep breath, I jabbed the tip of the prybar towards the center of the growth. Not hard, just a prod. The moment the metal touched it, the reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. The entire mass recoiled, contracting violently like muscle tissue touched with fire. A faint, high-pitched whine, almost too high for human ears, resonated through the metal hull beneath me. The pale tendrils whipped back into the oily water, and the central mass seemed to flatten against the pontoon, spreading slightly, its color darkening to a bruised purple. It didn't detach. It clung tighter, embedding itself further into the corroded metal. I scrambled back, dropping the pry bar with a clang. It hadn't attacked, but the reaction was undeniably biological, intelligent. And that sound, that awful, piercing whine, it felt like a silent scream, or worse, a signal. Shaking, I retreated into my shack, slamming the flimsy door shut, jamming a piece of scrap metal against it as a makeshift lock. It offered pathetic security against whatever that thing was, the amalgam. It wasn't just a future threat anymore. It was a present horror, literally at my doorstep. Was it drawn here by my radio signals? Had receiving the transmission painted a target on my back? Or was it simply spreading? Sleep was impossible that night's cycle. Every creak of the raft, every splash outside, sounded like the amalgam testing my defenses. I replayed the tape endlessly, straining to hear nuances, hidden clues. The static accompanying the voice, was it just interference or the sound of the amalgam itself, the sound of reality tearing? The mention of Hull Prophet being right, wrong. What did that mean? That his ravings held truth, but his interpretation was flawed or dangerous. As the gray dawn filtered through the cracks, bringing no warmth, only a renewed sense of dread, I knew I couldn't stay locked inside. Scrap Shepherd's dismissal stung, but it didn't negate the threat. If the cordon leader wouldn't listen, maybe others would see. Maybe someone else had noticed the changes. Leaving the shack felt like stepping into enemy territory. I gave the pontoon edge a wide berth, not daring to look down, though I could almost feel the presence clinging below. I needed to observe, gather evidence, find anything concrete that might convince someone, anyone, before it was too late. The raft seemed quieter today, subdued. The usual chaotic energy felt muted. Or perhaps it was just my heightened senses painting everything with a veneer of dread. I forced myself to look closely, to catalog the anomalies. The gelatinous patches on the water were larger, thicker, their surfaces disturbingly smooth, reflecting the gray sky like dead eyes. The pale, fibrous growths I'd seen on walkways were definitely more numerous, creeping up support struts, winding around mooring lines like parasitic vines. I saw a scavenger gull pecking at one, then hopping back with a distressed squawk, shaking its head violently. Even the mutated wildlife seemed wary. Near the central trading hub, a chaotic sprawl built on the deck of a listing car ferry, I saw Meyer Medic tending to a groaning scavenger. The man's arm was covered in angry red welts, weeping a thin, oily fluid. "Saw it too, Medic," another scavenger muttered, nervously watching the water. Like the plastic turned soft, see, put my hand right on it, steadying myself. Felt warm, then it just bit me. Meyer Medic applied a poultice of green-gray sludge that hissed on contact with the welts. "New toxins leaching likely," the medic grumbled, their voice muffled by a thick respirator. "Or another bacterial bloom. Waters are fouler than usual. Keep clear of discolored patches, and stay out of the sump." The injured man shuddered. Wasn't near the sump. This was up by the crane base, solid walkway, or it was. Crane base, near the forge hand's workshop. My stomach clenched. I edged closer, trying to look casual. Something wrong near the forge. Meyer Medic glanced up, eyes sharp behind protective goggles. Heard rumors. Forge hands complaining about the heat regulators malfunctioning. Place is running too hot, metal's getting softer than it should. Probably just failing equipment. Everything fails eventually out here. Failing equipment, or the first whispers of the future described on my tape, the Forge Hands workshop, melting. Later, near the entrance to the sump, I saw them again, the rusted faithful, but they weren't just milling about today. Several were kneeling on a low platform of compressed debris, their heads bowed towards a particularly large cluster of the pale, fibrous growths that had erupted near a leaking effluence pipe. Hull Prophet stood among them, gaunt and imposing, his eyes blazing with feverish intensity. He held aloft a piece of rusted, twisted metal that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal orange glow, similar to the sores on his followers. "Behold the flesh of the awakened," Hull Prophet cried, his voice echoing strangely in the damp air. "The sacred growths. The patch gives birth to its holy form, reaching for its children. It sheds the impurities of the old world, the hard shell of non-belief. Soon it will flow, cleanse, absorb. We the faithful will be the first to dissolve into its glorious consciousness. The great rust is upon us." His followers moaned and swayed, some reaching out to gently touch the pulsing fibers with reverent fingers. One of them looked up and saw me watching, their face splitting into a hideous grin that revealed gums stained with rust. They pointed a trembling finger at me. The listener. He hears the whispers but denies the truth. He clings to the dying world. Hull Prophet turned his burning gaze on me. "Listener, still chasing ghosts in your wires. Can you not feel the truth vibrating in the very deck beneath your feet? The amalgam rises, it calls to its own. Even now its tendrils seek out the pathways, the nerves, the listeners." He smiled, a terrifyingly knowing expression. "It finds fertile ground in doubt, but it prefers the embrace of faith. You should join us, listener, be dissolved, not devoured." I backed away slowly, the prophet's words echoing the transmission, twisting it into a horrifying invitation. They weren't just interpreting the signs, they were welcoming the destruction, seeing salvation in the sentient goo that intended to consume us all. They knew about the amalgam, but they called it God. Back in the relative isolation of my sector, the sense of wrongness intensified. A netrat scurried past and I noticed its tail seemed fused. Not bitten off, but melted smoothly into the plastic debris it ran across. Further on, a section of walkway made from heavy-duty plastic sheeting felt strangely pliable underfoot, sagging more than it should. When I poked it with my pry bar, it yielded like soft clay, retaining the indentation. Despair began to set in. Scrap Shepherd wouldn't listen. The faithful welcomed the apocalypse. The rest of the raft seemed determined to ignore the creeping horror, dismissing it as business as usual. What could I possibly do? That evening cycle, huddled in my shack, the reel-to-reel playing softly, I focused on the sounds behind the voice. The tearing static, the bubbling sludge. Was there a pattern? Listening intently, filtering out my own future self's panicked words, I heard something else. Faint, rhythmic. A complex series of clicks and whines buried deep in the noise. Not random. It sounded almost like communication, like the amalgam wasn't just a mindless consuming force, but something coordinating, signaling. Suddenly, a new sound intruded, not from the tape but from outside, a low, resonant hum building steadily in intensity. It vibrated through the floor, making the stacked electronics on my shelves rattle. It was deeper than the usual groans of the raft, more focused, directional. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the crane base, from the forge hand's workshop. I scrambled to the shack door, peering out into the deepening twilight. In the distance, where the forge hand's massive crane structure dominated the skyline, an unnatural orange glow lit the perpetual gray haze. It wasn't the usual intermittent sparks of the forge. This was a steady, intense light, pulsing slowly, accompanied by that deep, resonant hum. Smoke, thicker and darker than usual, billowed into the sky. Then a sound drifted across the water, barely audible but unmistakable, a sharp, metallic screaming. Not human. It was the sound of tortured metal, of structures groaning under impossible stress. The forge hand's workshop, the heat regulators, the softening metal, the pulsing orange glow. The transmission wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a real-time commentary. The future was collapsing into the present and the amalgam was starting with the forge. My proof was no longer just a voice on a tape. It was happening now, out there in the heart of the raft, and I was utterly, terrifyingly powerless to stop it. Chapter 4: The Forge Burns. The metallic screaming ripped through the humid air, a high-pitched shriek of metal tortured beyond its limits. It wasn't a single sound but a chorus of groans, tearing noises and percussive impacts, underscored by that deep, resonant hum that vibrated in my bones even from this distance. The orange glow pulsed over the forge hand's workshop, casting flickering, monstrous shadows across the lower decks of the raft. This wasn't a malfunction. This was consumption. The future wasn't collapsing into the present. It was tearing its way through. Paralysis held me for only a moment. Scrap Shepherd's disbelief, Hull Prophet's madness, my own fear, none of it mattered now. The proof wasn't just on my tape. It was unfolding in fire and tormented steel across the water. Someone had to see. Someone had to understand. And selfishly, terrifyingly, I needed to know if I was next. If the amalgam was truly drawn to my signal, was this just the overture before it came knocking or flowing through my own walls? Grabbing the pry bar again and adding a rusty machete I kept for cutting thick plastic ropes, I left the relative and likely imagined safety of my shack. The pulsating mass on my pontoon. I didn't dare look. I just scrambled onto the main walkway, heart hammering, and headed towards the disaster. The raft, usually teeming with furtive movement even in the dim cycles, was eerily deserted along the initial stretch. It seemed everyone who could was either heading away from the noise or had barricaded themselves inside their makeshift homes. But as I got closer, the scene changed. Figures emerged from the gloom, silhouetted against the infernal glow, people fleeing. Their faces were masks of terror. Some were crying, others wore the blank stare of shock. A man stumbled past, clutching an arm wrapped in blood-soaked rags, muttering, "It flowed." The metal just flowed. A woman ran by, dragging two sobbing children, her eyes wide with horror, screaming about things in the heat. I tried to stop one scavenger, recognizable from the trading hub. "What happened? What did you see?" He flinched back, eyes darting nervously towards the pulsing light. "Don't go near the forge. It ain't right, the floor." It turned to soup, hot soup, pulled Gan down, just swallowed him. He shook his head violently. And the tools, they started moving on their own. Forge had tried to shut off the main furnace, but the controls, they melted in his hands. He was screaming. Oh gods, the screaming. The scavenger choked back a sob and ran, disappearing into the maze of debris. Melted controls, moving tools, the floor turning to liquid. It was worse than the transmission had hinted. The amalgam wasn't just consuming, it was animating, corrupting, turning the forge hand's own creations against him. The air grew thick with acrid smoke, and the stench of burning chemicals and superheated metal. The resonant hum intensified, becoming a physical pressure against my eardrums. Ahead, the crane-based structure housing the forge was barely recognizable. Sheets of metal cladding had peeled away like burnt skin, revealing the superstructure beneath, which glowed cherry red in places. Molten plastic dripped from higher levels like malevolent rain. The great crane arm itself, usually a symbol of industrious salvage, was bent at an unnatural angle, groaning under stress, its hooks swinging wildly. And the source of the orange glow. It wasn't just the furnace running wild. Large sections of the workshop floor, walls, even some of the heavy machinery, were pulsing with that same sickening light I'd seen in the amalgam mass on my pontoon. It was as if the structure itself had been infected, becoming part of the entity. Tendrils of semi-molten metal and plastic snaked out from these glowing patches, probing, retracting, reshaping the environment. Near the main entrance, which was now a gaping maw of twisted steel, I saw Meyer Medic working frantically, aided by a couple of terrified volunteers. They were dragging survivors clear, administering desperate first aid. I rushed over. "Medic, what is this?" Meyer Medic didn't look up, busy applying a thick, cooling paste to a horrific burn on a young woman's leg. Hell opened up right here." Their voice was strained, tight with controlled panic. Something in the furnace or under it, it just erupted, heat like nothing I've ever felt. Metal started running like water, people trapped, and the constructs. They gestured vaguely towards the roaring entrance with a sludge-covered hand. Forge hands automatons, the loader arms. They turned. Started attacking people, welding beams cutting folks down where they stood. My blood ran cold. Automatons, loader arms. The amalgam could control machinery. This wasn't just a consuming ooze. It was an intelligence capable of weaponizing our own technology against us. "The forge hand?" I asked, dreading the answer. Meyer Medic shook their head grimly. "Haven't seen him," went back in, trying to trigger the emergency coolant flush maybe. "Haven't seen him come out." They finally looked at me, eyes grim behind the goggles. "You were right, weren't you, Patchwork? That crazy talk about your radio. This is it, isn't it?" I could only nod, the validation tasting like ash in my mouth. Suddenly, a figure stumbled out of the blazing entrance, wreathed in smoke, coughing violently. It was one of the forge hand's apprentices, a young woman known for her skill with intricate wiring. Her face was smeared with soot, eyes wide with terror. "It's got him," she screamed, collapsing near us. "The forge hand, it wrapped around him, the molten stuff, pulled him into the main forge core. He's part of it now." Meyer Medic rushed to her side. "Part of it, dissolved, absorbed." just like Hull Prophet preached but stripped of any religious ecstasy, revealed as pure horror. As the apprentice coughed and sobbed, another sound rose above the general chaos, chanting. Approaching from a side passage, drawn like moths to the catastrophic flame, were Hull Prophet and his rusted faithful. Their eyes shone with manic glee as they beheld the destruction. "Glory, the purification begins," Hull Prophet roared, raising his pulsing metal shard towards the burning forge. "The great rust smelts the unworthy. The amalgam reveals its power. Blessed are those consumed by the holy fire. Blessed is the forge hand, the first sacrifice to be reborn in the flow." Several of the faithful moaned ecstatically, starting to move towards the entrance, arms outstretched. Meyer Medic scrambled up, shouting, "Get back, you fools! It's death in there! Toxic fumes, collapsing structures." "Death is merely transformation," Hull Prophet countered, blocking the medic's path. "We embrace the dissolution. We will become one with the amalgam." While the medic argued futilely with the prophet, my attention was snagged by something else. Amidst the roar of the fire and the groaning metal, I could hear it again, that complex pattern of rhythmic clicks and whines I detected on the tape. It was louder now, clearer, seeming to emanate from the very heart of the glowing, corrupted structure. It wasn't just random noise, it was structured, repeating. A signal. And something deep within my shack, my antenna array, seemed to resonate with it. A faint vibration traveled up my spine, a sickening sense of connection. The amalgam wasn't just consuming the forge, it was using the heat, the power, the metal, perhaps even the forge hand's absorbed consciousness to broadcast, to amplify its presence, its signal, calling to other parts of itself, calling to me. The ground lurched violently. A section of the upper walkway near the crane arm buckled with a deafening screech, sending debris raining down. One of Hull Prophet's followers, caught beneath the falling scrap, disappeared with a wet crunch. The prophet didn't even flinch, his gaze fixed rapturously on the destruction. We had to get out of here. This entire section of the raft felt unstable, ready to collapse or be consumed. "Medic," I yelled over the din. "We need to pull back, warn the others. This whole area could go." Meyer Medic, seeing the futility of stopping the faithful, nodded grimly. "Help me with the injured." Together, we started dragging the wounded away from the immediate vicinity of the burning forge. The heat was intense, the air barely breathable. Behind us, Hull Prophet led his chanting followers closer to the inferno, seemingly oblivious as another section of the structure sagged inwards with a roar. As we retreated onto a sturdier-looking barge platform, I risked a glance back. The orange glow within the forge was intensifying, pulsing faster now, and slithering out from the main entrance, moving with unnatural speed across the debris-strewn ground, were shapes. Constructs made of fused metal, glowing plastic, and wire, animated by the amalgam's energy. Some resembled distorted versions of the forge hand's loader arms, dragging themselves forward on sparking cables. Others were formless blobs of semi-molten material, flowing like lava, consuming scrap as they moved. They ignored the ecstatic faithful, instead heading unerringly towards the edges of the disaster zone, spreading outwards, expanding the infection. One shape, larger than the others, detached itself from the main flow and turned, seeming to fixate on our retreating group. It was vaguely humanoid, incorporating recognizable pieces of machinery, gears, pistons, welding nozzles, all fused into a glowing, pulsating parody of a body. Embedded in its chest, like a grotesque heart, was something that looked horribly like the Forge Hand's heavy work mask, its lenses glowing with the same internal orange light. It raised a limb made of twisted rebar and white-hot pipes, and the deep, resonant hum intensified, focusing directly on us. I felt that sickening connection again, the pull towards my shack, my antenna. It knew who I was. It knew where I lived. "Run!" Myrmetic screamed, shoving me forward. We scrambled away, dragging the injured, not daring to look back as the sounds of melting metal, ecstatic chanting, and the purposeful, clicking hum of the amalgam pursued us into the oppressive darkness of the raft. The proof was undeniable now, written in fire and melted steel. But convincing the rest of the raft felt less important than simple survival. The amalgam was loose, it was spreading, and it seemed to have taken a very personal interest in the listener. Chapter 5: Cordon of Fear. We ran. Not a panicked scramble, but a grim, stumbling retreat through the labyrinthine passages of the raft, the horrifying sounds of the burning forge echoing behind us, the tortured metal, the triumphant chanting of the faithful, and underneath it all that resonant, purposeful hum. Myrmetic, despite their own exhaustion, moved with practiced efficiency, directing the volunteers carrying the wounded, barking orders to keep moving, stay alert. I clutched my prybar and machete, eyes scanning the oppressive shadows, ears straining for any sound of pursuit from the Forge Hand construct or its lesser brethren. The air tasted foul, thick with smoke and fear. News of the disaster at the forge was spreading faster than the amalgam itself, carried on the panicked shouts of fleeing survivors, amplified by the raft's rumor mill. Doors were being slammed shut, makeshift barricades erected from scrap metal and furniture. Faces peered out from behind grimy plastic sheeting windows, eyes wide with terror and suspicion. The fragile semblance of community that held the raft together was fraying, replaced by raw, primal fear. "Keep moving," Myrmetic urged, shoving a lagging volunteer forward. "We need to get them to the safe zone near the East Tangle. Barge Boss keeps some semblance of order there, has medical supplies." "Safe zone," I croaked, my throat raw from smoke. "Is anywhere safe now?" Myrmetic glanced back towards the flickering orange glow staining the sky. "Safer than this, that thing, whatever it is. It's not just destroying, it's spreading, corrupting." They gestured towards one of the injured, a man groaning softly on a makeshift stretcher. His skin, where it wasn't covered in soot, had taken on a strange, waxy pallor, and faint, vein-like lines pulsed beneath the surface with a weak orange light. Saw 3 others like him closer to the forge. Burns weren't bad, but something got inside them. They started seizing, muttering about joining the flow, had to restrain them. Infection, not just of structures but of people. The amalgam wasn't just consuming, it was converting. Hull Prophet's twisted gospel made flesh. My own tape recorder, tucked safely inside my patched jacket, felt heavy, accusatory. The voice warned of this, the remaking, the absorption. As we navigated a wider section built upon the deck of a listing freighter, we encountered another wave of fleeing inhabitants. Chaos reigned. A fight had broken out over a salvaged water barrel. Further down, a small group huddled together, pointing accusingly at a lone figure trying to slip away into the shadows. He was down near the sump, someone screamed. With the faithful, he carries the rot. They surged forward, brandishing makeshift weapons. Mob justice born of terror. We skirted the edges of the conflict, myarmetic cursing under their breath. Panic setting in. Won't be long before neighbor turns on neighbor. Suddenly, one of the wounded we carried began to thrash violently on their stretcher. It was the young apprentice from the forge. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she let out a high-pitched whine eerily similar to the sound the amalgam mass on my pontoon had made when I touched it. Orange light pulsed visibly beneath her soot-stained skin. "Hold her," Meyer medic yelled, fumbling for a sedative injector. But before they could administer it, the apprentice arched her back, limbs stiffening. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, and a stream of thick, glowing orange sludge erupted, spattering the deck and the nearest volunteer, who screamed and recoiled. The apprentice then went limp, the light fading from her skin, leaving her unnervingly still. The volunteer frantically wiped at the viscous fluid on his arm, but where it touched, the skin immediately reddened, blistering as if burned. He stared at it in horror, then at the now lifeless apprentice. The fear in the group escalated into outright panic. Two of the volunteers dropped their stretcher handles and fled into the darkness. "Damn it," Meyer medic snapped, injecting the now-still apprentice with something anyway. "It's contagious. Airborne contact. Gods, we don't know anything." They looked at me, desperation behind their goggles. "Patchwork the safe zone. It won't be enough. This thing is spreading too fast. We need containment. We need defenses. We need Scrap Shepherd." I nodded grimly. My earlier failure stung, but the situation had changed drastically. The forge disaster wasn't a rumor or a radio ghost anymore. It was a burning, screaming reality. And we had eyewitnesses, casualties, even proof of the infection's nature. They have to listen now. "They will listen," Meyer medic stated, regaining some composure. "I'm sector medic. My word carries weight, even with that hard-shelled hermit. We take the remaining wounded, get them secured nearby, then we head straight for the West Flotilla. You, me, and the proof on that tape." After diverting briefly to leave the wounded under the shaky care of a few less panicked raft dwellers in a relatively secure barge hold, promising reinforcements, Meyer medic and I set off towards the cordon. The journey was tense. The raft felt increasingly alien. More pulsating growths clung to structures, some now the size of large barrels, shedding fibrous tendrils that drifted like toxic seaweed in the air currents. The metallic clicking and humming seemed a constant presence now, an unnerving background noise just beneath the threshold of conscious hearing. We saw figures shuffling in the shadows, their movements jerky, unnatural, sometimes emitting faint traces of that orange glow, the infected, avoiding contact, or perhaps seeking new hosts. We passed near the sump entrance again. It was deserted now, save for discarded rags and patches of cooling orange sludge. Hull Prophet and his core followers had presumably achieved their communion back at the forge. Had they simply burned, or had they become something else? Fuel for the amalgam's growth, new carriers for its horrific transformation. As we approached the West Flotilla, the atmosphere changed again. The chaotic panic of the central raft gave way to a tense, militarized lockdown. Makeshift barricades had been reinforced, bristling with sharpened metal stakes. Floodlights cut through the gloom, powered by generators that roared defiance against the encroaching silence. Guards patrolled every walkway, their weapons held at the ready, their faces hidden behind masks, their postures radiating suspicion. They weren't just guarding against external threats. They seemed terrified of infiltration. The main gate bulkhead was sealed tight. More guards than I'd ever seen stationed there stood watch on the ramparts above. Harpoon guns and automatic rifles aimed outwards and inwards. "Halt!" the shout echoed metallically. Floodlights pinned us in their glare. "Identify yourselves, state your purpose." Meyer Medic stepped forward, hands raised slightly. "Sector Medic Meyer, requesting immediate audience with Scrap Shepherd. We have urgent intelligence regarding the Forge incident and an imminent threat to the entire raft, including this cordon." There was a pause. Figures moved on the rampart. A different voice, amplified, possibly Scrap Shepherd themselves, crackled down. "Medic, what is this? We're under lockdown, reports of contamination spreading from the Forge site. No one enters or leaves." "That contamination is the threat," Meyer Medic shouted back. "It's sentient, it's hostile. It destroyed the Forge, absorbed the Forge hand. Patchwork here has proof, a transmission that predicted all of this." A transmission. The amplified voice was heavy with suspicion. "The listener's ghost stories. Now is not the time, Medic." "It's not a story," I yelled, stepping beside the medic, my voice raw. "It predicted the Forge melting. It predicted your cordon being breached. It calls itself the Amalgam." I held up the tape recorder. "Listen to it before it's too late." "Breached," the word hung in the air. There was another pause, longer this time. Then Scrap Shepherd's voice, closer now, less amplified, perhaps speaking from just behind the bulkhead. "The Forge incident is confirmed. Mass casualties, structural collapse, reports match. Some of what you claim, but sentient, a predicting transmission. It sounds like mass hysteria." "Look around you, Shepherd," Meyer Medic gestured wildly. "The growths, the sludge, the infected, it's real. The Forge was just the beginning." "We are taking precautions based on potential biohazards," Scrap Shepherd countered, their voice tight. "Standard containment protocol. Sealing the sector protects my people." "Protecting them from what? Reality?" I shot back, desperation making me bold. "The transmission said your cordon would be breached. It didn't say how. Maybe it's not brute force. Maybe it flows through cracks you haven't even considered. Maybe," the terrifying thought struck me, "it's already inside." A heavy silence fell. The only sounds were the thrum of generators and the distant, unsettling hum from the Forge ruins. Had my words hit a nerve? Did they have internal problems, unexplained sicknesses, strange malfunctions? Suddenly, a piercing alarm klaxon erupted from within the West Flotilla. Shouts and sounds of commotion echoed from behind the sealed bulkhead. The guards on the ramparts stiffened, aiming their weapons inwards now, their confusion palpable. Scrap Shepherd's voice came again, no longer amplified, strained with sudden urgency. "Section Delta, report. What is that alarm? What's happening? A garbled reply crackled over a nearby speaker, interspersed with static and screams. Flowing through the vents, seal the bulkhead, oh gods, the metal, it's bending. The transmission, my recording, it wasn't just predicting the future anymore, it was happening now. The massive steel bulkhead door in front of us began to groan, buckling inwards at the center as if pressed by an immense, invisible hand. Rivets popped like gunshots. A thin line of glowing orange sludge squeezed through a widening seam near the bottom. Scrap Shepherd cursed, the sound sharp with dawning horror and disbelief. It is here. The amplified voice roared across the cordon. All hands, code amber, hostile entity within the perimeter, seal internal sectors, all units converge on Delta bulkhead. The cordon wasn't breached from the outside. It was being eaten from within. The amalgam had already found a way in, just as the voice, my voice, had tried to warn. And we were locked out, watching the fortress consume itself. Chapter 6: The Static Embrace. The groan of the tortured bulkhead intensified, metal screaming as it warped inwards. The orange sludge oozing through the widening seam pulsed with sickening vitality. On the ramparts, the guards' discipline evaporated into raw panic. Shots rang out, wildly fired into the chaos behind the failing door. Scrap Shepherd's amplified orders were nearly lost in the din, a desperate attempt to impose order on a situation spiraling into nightmare. Hold the line, fall back to secondary containment, use incendiaries. Meyer Medic grabbed my arm, pulling me back from the imminent breach zone. We can't stay here. That door goes, whatever's behind it washes out. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the horrifying vindication unfolding before me. The transmission wasn't just accurate, it was playing out note by terrifying note. The cordon was breached, not by external assault but by insidious internal corruption. The amalgam flowed through the vents, bent the metal. With a final, ear-splitting screech, the center of the massive steel bulkhead tore open like wet cardboard. It wasn't an explosion, but a hideous yielding. Molten metal, fused plastic, and poolsing organic matter surged outwards in a grotesque wave. Embedded within the flow were shapes that writhed, sections of ventilation shafts twisted into toothy maws, bulkhead plates animated like scuttling crabs, and horrifyingly, figures in cordon guard uniforms, their bodies partially dissolved, limbs replaced by glowing metallic tendrils, their faces frozen in silent screams. The infection was rapid, absolute. Scrap Shepherd's forces, caught between the external lockdown and the internal eruption, were thrown into disarray. Harpoon guns fired, slugs tearing through the softer parts of the amalgam wave, but doing little to stop its momentum. Automatic rifles spat bullets that ricocheted off fused metal sections or were simply absorbed into the viscous mass. Incendiary grenades detonated, setting patches of the sludge ablaze, eliciting that high-pitched, tearing whine. But the fire seemed only to cauterize the edges before the flow smothered the flames. From the heart of the breach, moving with terrifying speed, emerged a figure that made my blood freeze solid, the forge-hand construct. Larger now, augmented with pieces of cordon weaponry and plating scavenged from within, its single glowing eye fixed unerringly on me. It ignored the guards battling the main wave, its purpose clear. It remembered me. It was hunting the listener. Patchwork, Myrmetic yelled, shoving me again. Move. We scrambled backwards, the heat radiating from the breach intense. The amalgam wasn't just consuming, it was radiating energy, heat, and that awful, pervasive hum that resonated deep in my chest, connecting with something primal, something terrified within me. My antenna, the nerve, the connection the voice had warned of. Then Scrap Shepherd appeared, blasting their way out of a side hatch near the ruined gate, flanked by two heavily armed guards. The cordon leader opened fire with a heavy-caliber salvaged machine gun. Tracer rounds slammed into the forge hand construct, staggering it momentarily, tearing off chunks of its amalgamated armor. Listener, Shepard's filtered voice barked, acknowledging me without apology. That thing is focused on you. What does it want? My gear, the signal, I shouted back over the roar. The transmission said my antenna. It sees it as a nerve. It wants to listen or maybe broadcast. Broadcast what? Itself, its consciousness, maybe calling more of itself. Or, a horrifying thought bloomed, maybe it wants to send its own message back through time. Scrap Shepherd paused their firing for a fraction of a second, the implication hitting home. If the amalgam could receive, could it transmit? Could it rewrite its own past, ensure its own dominion? The forge hand construct recovered, its severed parts quickly reabsorbed or replaced by flowing sludge from the main breach. It raised its weaponized limb, no longer just twisted rebar, but now incorporating a cordon energy rifle, and fired a searing beam that vaporized the ground where I'd stood seconds before. We can't fight it conventionally, Myrmetic yelled, examining a patch of glowing sludge that had spattered near us. It adapts, regenerates. It's like fighting liquid metal. Scrap Shepherd cursed again, firing another burst. Then we need an unconventional weapon. Listener, your transmission, did it say anything else? A weakness, a frequency? My mind raced, replaying the distorted words. No weakness, just consumption, flowing. The center cannot hold. Wait, the center cannot hold. Was that literal, a structural weakness, or something more? And the static, the rhythmic clicks and whines buried within it? A signal, its own internal communication. An idea sparked, desperate, insane. The signal, the clicks and whines within the transmission, it's how it coordinates. If I can isolate that frequency, maybe I can disrupt it, or overload it. How? Shepard demanded, dodging another energy blast. My main rig, back at my shack, it's powerful enough. If I can get back there, maybe I can broadcast the disruption signal. Or, I looked at the forge hand construct, feeling that awful resonance intensify. Maybe I don't need to. It wants my antenna, wants the connection. Maybe I can overload the link right here. It was madness, channeling the amalgam's energy, using myself as a conduit, but watching the relentless advance, the guards being overwhelmed, consumed, remade. There were no sane options left. Medic, I grabbed their arm. My recording, get it playing, loud near the breach, amplify its own noise back at it. To Scrap Shepherd, I yelled, keep it busy, I need to concentrate. Meyer medic, understanding dawning in their eyes, nodded grimly. They grabbed my recorder, found a portable amplifier amongst the abandoned gear, and scrambled towards the edge of the chaos, setting the tape to play, the distorted voice, my voice, screaming its prophecy into the roar of the Amalgam's attack. Scrap Shepherd and their remaining guards laid down suppressing fire, drawing the Forge Hand's attention. I closed my eyes, shut out the immediate chaos and focused inwards, reaching for that sickening resonance, the hum vibrating through my bones. I pictured my antenna array back at the shack, the salvaged dishes, the tangled wires, the nerve ending the Amalgam craved. I focused on the connection, the invisible tether linking me to the monstrous intelligence spreading before me. Instead of resisting the pull, the hum, I leaned into it. I mentally opened the gate, inviting the connection, visualizing my own mind as a receiver dish. The effect was instantaneous and agonizing. Raw data, pure sensation, flooded my consciousness, heat, pressure, the taste of rust and plastic, the screams of the absorbed, the cold, alien thoughts of the Amalgam itself. It wasn't a single mind, but a billion dissociated whispers converging into a horrifying consensus. Grow, consume, assimilate, become. The clicks and whines intensified in my head, resolving into complex patterns, the Amalgam's coordination language. I grasped at the structure of it, seeking the core frequency, the central rhythm holding the disparate parts together. The center cannot hold. The Forge Hand construct paused its attack, its glowing eye swiveling towards me. It felt my deliberate connection, the invitation. It tilted its head, emitting a low-frequency rumble that resonated directly in my skull. Now, I focused all my will, all my fear and desperation, into amplifying that core rhythm, pushing it back along the connection, but twisted, dissonant, feeding its own coordination signal back onto itself in a feedback loop. I screamed, not with my voice, but with pure mental energy pushed down the psychic channel. The effect was catastrophic. The Forge Hand construct convulsed violently, its limbs spasming. The orange glow pulsing within it flared erratically, flickering like a failing bulb. The main wave of the Amalgam faltered, its purposeful flow disrupted into chaotic eddies. Sections seemed to fight against each other, tendrils retracting, constructs freezing mid-motion. The high-pitched tearing whine filled the air, no longer controlled, but the sound of something breaking apart from within. The Forge Hand construct staggered towards me, its internal structure visibly destabilizing, molten plastic dripping from its joints. It raised its weapon arm one last time, but before it could fire, Scrap Shepherd emptied their machine gun's entire drum into its chest cavity, shattering the Forge Hand mask embedded there. The construct shuddered, then collapsed into a heap of twitching, cooling slag, the orange light within extinguishing rapidly. The main Amalgam flow recoiled from the chaotic feedback, retreating back through the torn bulkhead as if burned, leaving behind twitching, isolated fragments and cooling puddles of sludge. The rhythmic hum ceased, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of residual fires and the groans of the wounded. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, the psychic assault leaving me drained, nauseous, my head pounding. Meyer medic rushed to my side. "Patchwork, are you all right? What did you do?" "Feedback loop," I managed, forcing the words out. used its own signal against it, disrupted its coordination, the center. It couldn't hold. Scrap Shepherd approached slowly, surveying the devastation within their cordon, the dead, the wounded, the twitching remnants of the amalgam. They looked at the cooling slag heap that was the forge hand, then at me. Their mask was cracked, revealing a glimpse of a scarred, weary face beneath. "You were right, listener," Shepherd said, the filtered voice flat, devoid of its earlier arrogance. "About all of it. They kicked at a piece of twitching debris. We contained this breach, but it's still out there, spreading." "What now?" Meyer Medic asked, looking around at the wreckage and the terrified faces of the surviving guards. Scrap Shepherd gazed out towards the raft, towards the distant, ominous glow of the forge ruins. "Now, we adapt, we fight, we listen." Their gaze met mine. "Your transmission, play it again, play all of it. We need to know everything it says, every detail. It's not just a warning anymore, it's intel." Later, as emergency repairs began on the breached cordon bulkhead and Meyer Medic tended to the survivors, I sat on the cold deck plating, the tape recorder whirring softly beside me. The familiar, terrified voice filled the air once more, no longer just a prophecy of doom, but a desperate message from a future we were now actively fighting. The raft was irrevocably changed. The horror was real, tangible, and adapting. We had repelled one attack, wounded one part of the amalgam, but it was vast, ancient, perhaps born from the very essence of humanity's waste and neglect. The final transmission hadn't been the end of the story. It was the beginning of the war. The static embrace of the amalgam was tightening around our floating island of trash, and survival now depended not just on scavenging scrap, but on deciphering the whispers from a future that refused to die quietly. The end.